Welcome, everyone, to the RPG Goblin, a TTRPG podcast where we explore these games and make it fun and easy for you to learn them, because I know it can be super intimidating and scary and all of that. You might be just familiar with D&D, and there's a bunch of other games out there, and most of them are just as easy to play. And yeah, so I am your host, Willow, and I am the resident goblin, and I'm really obsessed with these games to a point where it may be a little concerning how much I talk about them, but it's fine. That's why we started the podcast. And on today's episode, we are going to be talking about One Ring, specifically the second edition of One Ring that Free League Publishing came out with. And to talk about this today, we have on Parker and Brandon from the Nat One Nerds podcast, another TTRPG exploration podcast, but they do it a little bit differently. Fantastic show. But I'm going to bring it over to them for them to properly introduce themselves and tell them all the cool things that they do. So go ahead, guys.
I'm Parker.
Hey, I'm Brandon, and we're the Nat One Nerds. Like Willow was saying, we do our own little TTRPG exploration podcast. We do it in very episodically. We go through and talk about how the systems work, what players need to know, what the game masters need to know. We'll do like an actual play of each one. We have a very strict system down, but it's kind of fun to get to explore all the different ones. And as she said, we just finished our exploration of the One Ring, and it was a lot of fun. Parker is the biggest Tolkien buff I've ever met, and probably one of the biggest ones that I will meet. So he knows everything about Tolkien. So he's really good on this one.
Yeah.
It makes sense that I was chosen to be the lore master when we played the system.
I mean, you are the real life lore master of Lord of the Rings.
I only have 20 of his books on my shelf, man. That's not
Only
even all of
20. Yeah. It could be a lot more. That's what we should be looking at. No, but I mean, that's why I think that you are also perfect to come on for this episode as well, because what I want is people who are obsessed and like literally, the biggest nerds for these games. So like, I love it. And so I'm really excited about this. And I think a little bit before we get into actually One Ring itself, I would love to ask how you actually got into Lord of the Rings originally, kind of your history there, and like why. I know it's probably opening a huge can of worms. Yeah.
So, okay, I do have a story because people have asked me that before. And really what it comes down to is my father read me The Hobbit when I was in second grade of elementary school. And I loved it a ton. And I wanted more. I wanted more. And my dad's like, well, there is more, but they're not children's books like The Hobbit is. And I just kept insisting, and he knew I was a big reader, so he's like, okay, we'll give it a try. And he did have to do a little explaining, throughout it, but we read the Lord of the Rings together, the whole trilogy.
Oh, I love
and
that.
I loved it. And then, when Fellowship of the Ring came out as a movie,
I have to say I'm thoroughly impressed with your attention span as a child. I couldn't have made it through the trilogy as a kid.
Oh, I was absolutely enthralled. Well, that's how me and my father spent time together. And that was one of the big things to do. The other one was scouting when I was older, but reading was a huge one.
Yeah, it's just like that special connection.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And so when the movie came out, he went to see it first because he wanted to make sure. Because he's like, okay, either number one, I want to make sure it's not overly violent, and number two, either this is going to be a massive success or it's going to be absolutely horrid, because nobody had successfully done a live action adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. And he was so impressed, and he's like, you know what, honestly, you're old enough, I give you permission to come see it with me.
Yeah.
Like, I'll go with you. And so we went, and obviously that just entrenched it even further. I got really obsessed with it. I did try to read the Silmarillion, and that was the one book that kind of started kicking my butt a bit, so I had to put that to the side. Kind of just enjoy the trilogy and the Hobbit and whatnot. But then obviously when I felt like I was better prepared and better educated, I was like, I'm going to try this again. Or the Silmarillion did the exact same effect as the Hobbit did. I got even more entrenched, and my dad had no idea what he created, because I also credit the Hobbit with me becoming a nerd.
Yeah,
and
for
getting
sure.
into the video games and
Hmm.
obviously later in life TTRPGs.
Hmm. I mean, it's the
um
natural pipeline.
yeah, well, I mean, it got to the point where in high school I had a group of friends that I'm still in touch with, and
Hmm.
we kind of each had our like speciality fandom. Like somebody was
Hmm.
the Doctor Who person, somebody was the
Yeah.
Nintendo person, I was the Tolkien buff. Like anything about Lord of the Rings, my jam. They watched it with me. They're like, "We knew you liked it. We didn't realize how much you liked it," and
I am
they
what
just
you made me.
I am what you, yeah, exactly. No, I love that so much. And I love that it's like such a special connection. And then like there being an actual, like, cause you can do things within the realm of, I think, Lord of the Rings, like using D&D and stuff like that, but like actually having like a system that caters directly to those stories and like that lore and all of that, I bet was absolutely amazing.
that's one of the best things I discovered when we started exploring this on our podcast.
Hmm.
Was this was a system that was built with the setting as the foundation first and
Yeah,
foremost. It wasn't
absolutely.
mechanics, it wasn't a story, it
Hmm.
wasn't some interesting concept of any kind. It was the world of Middle Earth that was already created by somebody
Hmm.
else. And they took that and they built from there because they wanted to, I can tell by reading the core rulebook that they wanted to respect the lore and the
Hmm.
legendarium of that world as much as possible
Oh, I love
without
that.
going too much, because there's a thing as creative license,
Hmm.
but it was still used as a very gentle and respectable tool.
Yeah. Oh
So
man. I love that even description of it. Like, they were respectful and gentle and like, it's almost I love using this phrase of like a love letter towards something. And I talked about like Alien RPG that felt like the same way, where and that's also by Free League. So maybe there's a theme here of
Free
like
League knows what they're doing.
yeah, exactly. I believe they have someone specifically who handles like all of the IP stuff where they want to be respectful, they want to be, honor the media that it comes from and all of that. And I think that is absolutely fascinating, especially with all the IPs that they're doing. And
Now,
I
if
am
only we could get
curious.
Hollywood to do something like that.
Oh yeah. If only. But yeah, and I'm curious, Brandon, do you have any love for Lord of the Rings yourself or
I mean, I've always grown up loving Lord of the Rings,
Mhm.
but nowhere near as much as Parker. Like, to me, it was just like a really cool fantasy adventure because I've
Yeah.
always loved fantasy in general.
Mhm.
And Lord of the Rings just really scratched that itch and was super well written.
Mhm.
And I just always loved how there's different depths that you can watch it at. So like as a kid,
Yeah.
I was like, oh cool, swords and magic and dragons and stuff. And then I
Mhm.
got older, I understood the plot more, like it just got deeper, and it's just you always find new stuff when you go through and watch it, unless you're Parker, because then you know everything. But it's so much fun, and I've always loved it, but
Mhm.
it's not like a staple in my life, but I've always
Yeah.
genuinely enjoyed it.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that both of you still have that love for the game. So I bet we'll actually, or not the game, the series and, the world. So when you did start the podcast, I'm curious, did you know about One Ring before you started it or was it after?
it was after we started,
Oh, and I
and
bet like that was immediately like, yes.
honestly, I don't remember because I think I was the one, because this is a system that I personally had chosen because I just was
Mhm.
like, I really, really want it. And if I'm going to spend money on a system, like this is it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't remember. I'm sure it was through like social media or something. But I just don't recall. But once I discovered it, I was like, oh, we got to do this. We got to do this.
Yeah.
We got to do this. And so after Brandon had chosen Call of Cthulhu, because for the first season we did four systems,
Mhm.
and we kind of alternated roughly what each one of us wanted to explore.
Yeah.
And so the last system was called Cthulhu that Brandon had chosen. And
Mhm.
so it was, quote unquote, my turn to choose. And I was like, one ring, one ring, one ring, one ring. Like,
There's no doubt about it. One ring. Like that's
It's
that's
what
what
we're
we're doing
doing.
here. Yeah. I love it. And so I guess this is probably going to be an episode that caters more heavily to the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien fans out there. But for people who aren't as familiar with that world and, that entire I guess not franchise. I guess series. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it.
The
How would
fandom.
you? Yeah, the fandom. Yeah. How would you explain what One Ring is to everyone? Specifically, One Ring, not necessarily Lord of the Rings as a whole.
So the One Ring is very much of a system that's built not around just goofing off in a generic fantasy world with your friends,
Hmm.
but it's specifically catered to storytelling. All
Hmm.
the mechanics of the One Ring center around building what it refers to as a fellowship,
Yeah.
which is your party, and it's the adventure that your fellowship goes on and the story that they weave through Middle Earth. And it's not as much about going to stop the big bad evil guy or going on
Hmm.
this adventure. It's primarily just storytelling, which is really
Yeah.
fun because it encourages a lot of collaborative interaction between the players.
I adore that. Absolutely. I mean, do you have one? Do you have an explanation as well? Because I feel like it's fun to kind of go back and forth between you guys. Like,
No, what Brandon said was spot on. It's very much about telling a story,
hmm,
building off that foundation of not only a world setting, but a full blown history, a full
yeah,
lore, what's going on at the time that you're playing
hmm,
in, and so it's all geared toward what Brandon was saying was essentially storytelling.
hmm,
Everything's meant to encourage, in character dialogue. It's meant
yeah,
to encourage role playing. It's meant to encourage those things that sometimes in, for example, D&D tables, as Brandon was saying, it's very much kind of a goofy for the most part, kind of do kind of whatever.
yeah,
And
hmm,
in the One Ring, like obviously there's places for that. Like you
yeah,
can't not do that there.
yeah. There's
But
gonna be
as
comedy.
yeah, oh, absolutely. When we play, there was plenty of comedy, and we only did a one shot, so
I mean,
probably our
I
D and
played
D
a
side coming
dwarven
out.
dad bard
A
in
dwarven dad
set
bard.
in like Middle Earth, so like you can
Hmm.
do whatever you want.
Yeah. All I can think of is a dwarven dad bard with a dwarven dad bod.
Oh, he absolutely did.
I
His whole reason for
love it.
adventuring was he wanted to get away from his kids because they were just a
Aw.
nuisance.
Cute.
I will say though, because what you said earlier was that this is definitely geared toward the Tolkien fans and the Lord of
Hmm.
the Ring fans, whether you've only seen the movies or whatever. Honestly, this system, in my opinion, is well built that anybody can play and enjoy.
Yeah.
The whether it's a one shot, whether it's a small campaign, even a long campaign, it's
Hmm.
it's it's still kind of meant for. It's still made with everybody in mind. My wife played with us on the podcast, and she
Hmm.
had only seen the movies like twice, both
Hmm.
with me, and
Hmm.
both because she loved me. Um, and afterwards, we kind of talked about it, and I said, "What did you think?" Because she was in our character creation episode,
Hmm.
she was in the actual play, and I said, "What did you kind of think? I know I loved it, and I don't want you to mince words. Did you
Yeah.
did you enjoy it? You seem to be enjoying it." And she said that she really liked the system. I think
Oh,
outside
I
of
love
D&D,
that.
this is her favorite system that she's played in.
Oh, that's
And
so
she's
cool.
only seen the movies twice, so I mean, yeah,
Hmm.
she's got that introduction,
Hmm.
but you don't need that introduction for the system
Yeah.
based off where because the core rulebook encourages you to play in this part of Middle Earth
Hmm.
that isn't as that doesn't involve as much lore from the movies and the trilogy books as other places.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
you're yeah. So it's still meant for everybody. Yeah, it's geared, it's a love letter and all that kind
Hmm.
of stuff. But if you're willing to give it a chance, then it can just be as just as fun of a system for those who aren't necessarily fans of Tolkien.
Absolutely. I actually really love that because I think it can be a little difficult sometimes with systems that rely heavily off of lore for people that are not familiar with it already to actually like play because it's like I know Vampire the Masquerade is a really good example of this. There is so much lore because this game is so old and the book is just filled with it that if you aren't familiar with the lore and the stories that they have within the book, you can't fully like play the game to its full potential because like it's kind of structured around that story. And so I love that at least from what you said, you aren't required to know every single detail about Lord of the Rings before you play. And I think that's really, really good, especially for a TTRPG. And I like it too, even as like alternate for alternate options for like fantasy games other than D&D too, because there's D&D and Pathfinder, but those like kind of follow the same kind of
They're like
high
two sides of the
magic and
same
all of
coin.
that. Yeah, they're very similar. High magic, combat, stuff like that. Those are big focuses
You
within
want
the
to play a
games.
cool wizard and blow stuff up.
Exactly. Well, I at least for me, I feel like I think of One Ring, and I feel like I see something that has less magic than something like D&D, and a little bit more down to earth. If that makes sense, would you say that's accurate?
Oh, absolutely. And that's actually taken directly from the actual legendarium lore from the books.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, if we'll just use the movies as an example because that'll
Hmm.
be people will know that a little bit better.
Absolutely.
If you kind of really pay attention how often Gandalf the wizard, because there's only
Hmm.
five wizards in all of Middle Earth, two of which we have absolutely no knowledge of. Tolkien kind of forgot about those guys. One is just a hermit in the woods, and one
Hmm.
turned absolutely evil.
Hmm.
So out of five wizards, here's this guy trying to rally the free peoples, and if you kind of pay attention, he hardly ever uses magic. You can count
Yeah.
how many times he uses magic in all three movies, probably on one hand.
Oh
How
wow.
many
I
Yeah.
always
times?
found that really strange.
Well, it's interesting because magic is definitely a heavy presence in the world. There's magical artifacts. There's the
Yes. Yeah.
elves. That there's the wizards. I mean, they do use magic. I mean,
I
magic.
mean, I
Gandalf
feel like
technically was using magic for fireworks, but it's a lot of it is just it's not this idea of magical might overcoming everything. It's a matter of people willingly choosing to hope, choosing to
Yeah.
fight, choosing to reach inside and find that courage.
well, I feel like
Because
Tolkien definitely took the route more of infusing the world with magic instead of having
Hmm.
magic be like spells. It's
Yeah.
everything is magic. You don't use magic.
Yeah, it's a part of the world. It's not its own thing. I like that a lot. And actually there's a game that I there's a game that I backed on Kickstarter or whatever crowdfunding thing called Land of Eam, which actually one of its main inspirations is Lord of the Rings. It's like Lord of the Rings combined with the Muppets. It's fantastic. I can't wait for it to actually like get to me because it's so cool. And now now that you're saying these things with like more of the earth and like there's magic ingrained in the world but it isn't spells. I'm getting a lot of that within Land of Eam too, so I love how that's like the main theme because it is so easy to be like, oh yeah, in D&D magic is everywhere, everyone can cast magic. It's not anything special. Well, it feels something a lot more specialized in this. And I'm curious, and maybe to start to segue a little bit into the character creation stuff, is there even options for people to wield magic within the game?
nope, not that we can tell. Obviously, we've only done it one time.
Hmm.
Read through the book a couple times, but as we kind of said, based off that inspiration with what how Tolkien built his world, Free League Publishing also was like, not really. I mean, there's some like aspects of character building, especially as you level up,
Hmm.
that could be kind of magical
Yeah.
in a sense, kind of like that. But if you're looking for wizards casting fireball or straight up sorcerers or
Yep.
necromancers or anything like that, you're not going to find that. You're not going to find a class or a culture that is built around casting spells. You won't
Yeah, it
find that.
almost feels like a breath of fresh air, like tone it down on magic a little bit. And I mean that I'm curious because you do mention that like things are infused with magic. Is that then almost like are people able to get like magical items? And obviously it's probably not similar to what magical items are within D&D. They're their own things, but is that something that's really prevalent in the world, especially in One Ring?
You can find weapons
Hmm.
like that that kind of give you um, what's called a favored roll. It's the equivalent of advantage in D&D.
Hmm.
You can find things that kind of do those like simple things to really help you,
Yeah.
because in this system you're not using a 20-sided dice, you're using a 12-sided dice.
Oh my
So
god. Yes, we love systems that use other dice. Yes, please. Especially the 12-sided die. Love it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that poor die doesn't get enough love.
It really doesn't. Like I think there are like maybe 3 systems that I've seen that actually use a D12 as its like core die, and I can only think of 2, and one of them is now One Ring. So no,
Yep.
I love that. And so actually let's get a bit into like I guess the system itself. You just mentioned that it uses the 12-sided die. Is that the only die that you're using throughout the game? Are there other dice that you use too?
No, so your 12-sided dice is called your feat die, and that is your
Mhm.
main dice.
Mhm.
There's
And what's
D6s too, but
yes, there are D6s as well. What's really unique about the D12 though in this system, so when you're first starting out and your character is doing pretty well for the most part, and you're rolling that dice, there are 2 symbols on the dice. Obviously, you can use any D12 and you can replace where it would be on the die. So where the 12 would be is what's a Gandalf rune. It's a
Mhm.
rune that he uses in The Hobbit to mark Bilbo's door as a
Oh, I
burglar,
love that.
essentially burglar for hire. So
Uh-huh.
it's used like that. And if you roll that, regardless if you hit your target number, which is how they determine successes or failures,
Mhm.
if you hit that, you succeed.
Yeah,
You
so it's
succeed.
almost like a
It's a
nat
nat
20
20.
type thing?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
love it.
essentially a nat 20. But on the flip side, where the 11 is an Eye of Sauron, which
Oh, fun.
is and what's unique is that just because you roll an Eye of Sauron doesn't mean you automatically fail. So there
Mhm.
is an automatic nat 20 in the system, but until you reach certain conditions with your character, the nat 1 effect doesn't happen until those conditions are met.
Mhm.
So because those target numbers can be kind of high.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Now,
still rough because if you roll the Eye of Sauron, your D12 automatically counts as a 0, which means you're
Oh.
only relying on your bonus dice, which
Ah.
most of the time you're going to fail with that anyways.
so those D6s that he was mentioning are, instead of having a modifier like in D&D where you have like
Mhm.
+1 to this or +5 to that, it's a number of dice instead added onto your feat dice. So if you're proficient with
Yeah.
a skill and have like say like 2 ticks in it,
Mhm.
you roll an additional 2d6 on top of that.
Oh,
And the
that's fun.
d6s also have a little elvish symbol that stands as a success icon that
Mhm.
grants you, not only does it count as a 6 on top of everything, but it also gives you special abilities should you pass the target number.
Mhm.
So it's almost like a mini nat 1, or sorry,
Yeah.
mini nat 20, sorry. We don't want mini nat 1s.
Yeah.
Those are horrible. Those might be worse than nat 1s.
Yeah, I mean, they sting a little bit more. Uh
Yeah. So, but yeah, so that's kind of how the dice system at least kind of
Yeah,
works.
I
Um,
like it.
yeah,
It's almost like combining a little bit of like a D20 type system where you're rolling just a D20 for everything combined with like a dice pool a little bit. It's just like a
hmm
smaller dice pool. And
yeah.
so I really like that. And I'm curious because you did mention that sometimes the target numbers can get pretty high. So like at least in your experience so far, like how high are you normally rolling in this game? That like, adding on like a D12 and then however many D6s.
So the way that
So,
the target numbers work in the One Ring is basically they start at 20, and
Mhm.
then you have 3 main stats, and each stat determines a different target number because you have 3 target numbers. And you
Mhm.
basically just subtract that stat from 20 to get your real target number.
Okay.
And so whenever you're rolling something in that category, then that's the target number you use.
Okay, so it's like kind of a straight across the board, but it's individualized for every character, I'm assuming then?
Yes.
Okay, that's actually really fun. It's almost like along the lines of like a actually, I'm trying to think of what that does remind me of. I was gonna say it's like a saving throw type thing, but that's not really how that works. Like
I
in
kind of
D&D.
refer to it as closer to like Call of Cthulhu, because Call of Cthulhu kind of
Oh, yeah,
has a
yeah.
target number system where you have to reach a certain number with your
Mhm.
D100 in order to pass or succeed in the check. So
Yeah,
that's
and it
kind of
feels
what's
very
happening here.
specific. Feels very
Yeah.
specific to the characters and kind of shows like, when they are super specialized and good at this one thing, it does show because then their target number is a lot lower. Oh man, I
Yeah.
actually really like that. That's
Yeah, so
cool.
instead of relying on the stats for an enemy per se to see if you pass their stats.
Mhm.
You're trying to overcome your own strengths and weaknesses that are
Mhm.
already there on your character sheet. So when you're in combat, you're always trying to meet or beat your strength target number because it's
Mhm.
based off strength because it's
Mhm.
physical.
Mhm.
And if you can beat that, you hit the enemy no matter what kind of enemy they are almost.
Mhm.
I always found that kind of strange because like it the target numbers are all set and they
Yeah.
never change, which means like it's the exact same target number if you're trying to sneak past some random drunk person as it is if you're trying to sneak through the literal like eye of Sauron staring at you. You have the
That
same
is
target number, and I
interesting,
found
yeah.
that kind of strange. But
Is
I
there
can also see where they're coming from.
Yeah, I guess you would then look to see if there's ways that they would be able to give you, like, advantages or like, not even necessarily within the common way of,
Yeah.
like, advantage, disadvantage dice, but, like, is there ways that that target number adjusts at all? Is there ways that you can get bonus dice, I guess, to your rolls, or maybe it takes away bonus dice?
That's actually a valid thing that the system does suggest is that if it's an exceedingly hard thing, like for instance, if you're passing the literal Eye of Sauron, which fun fact, the literal Eye of Sauron is not in the books at all. It's in the books, it's metaphorical. It's
Uh-huh.
metaphorical. It
Yeah.
doesn't actually exist. Um,
They wanted to
so
add more drama to the movies.
Yeah, of course.
yeah, you as the lore master, you can say, "Hey, go ahead and roll this ill-favored,"
Mhm.
essentially with disadvantage, or you could take away a bonus dice like minus
Yeah.
1d6, which in
Yeah,
this
I like
system
that.
you can just say minus one dice and everybody knows what you're talking about
Yeah.
because there's only one other set of dice and that's d6s.
Yeah, you're automatically rolling D12 for everything. Like, we're all on
Yeah.
the same page here. No, that I
Yeah,
like that for the balancing.
I kind of view the reason why target numbers are the way they're done in the system because I think it's trying to have a reflection of how Tolkien viewed Middle Earth was that
Mhm.
it was very much that anybody could be a hero
Yeah.
and anybody could overcome their own weaknesses or overcome their own ego
Mhm.
per se. Now, a lot of the characters have a lot of nobility background, but the real hero of the story is some random hobbit from the Shire, a
Yeah.
people that literally hate adventuring to no end. Like you won't find TTRPGs in the Shire because nobody wants to even do that there. Um, so that's kind of how I view it. Kind of maybe why they do a target number system. That's just
Mhm.
speculation on my part.
Mhm.
But trying to really showcase because there is ways to level up. It's not like D&D where you get mystical powers out of nowhere almost.
Yeah.
But there, that you do kind of level up. You do improve your character. You add d6s as you go along that you can put
Mhm.
in places and so forth because you're becoming a more seasoned adventurer.
Yeah. And actually, I
And
think I specifically I we'll continue your thought in a moment. I just wanted to say that I would like to touch on the character creation stuff soon here, especially with like the whole like anyone can be a hero. Like does that reflect as well within the character creation? But if you, sorry for interrupting you. I was just like
oh
I need to make sure to get that out.
no, we can absolutely dive into character creation.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And so I guess the like big question that I have is like what are the options slash steps for character creation, especially with the perspective of like, you know, in the movies, like it is just a bunch of people. Like it's just people. Like it's not like, oh yeah, we're already grand heroes or whatever. Like, do they reflect that as well within the One Ring character creation?
yeah, you kind of start out as kind of an average person or somebody
Hmm.
that has gone on very little adventuring. Um, and the biggest choice you make in character creation that kind of really defines almost everything else about your character is what heroic culture you choose.
Hmm.
So some of the options are you can be a hobbit from the Shire,
Hmm.
you can be of the Men of Bree, you can be a ranger of the North, kind of like Aragorn.
Hmm.
You can be an elf from Linden, which is in an elvish country off to the west. You can. I'm trying to think what other options are. You can be a dwarf of Durin's folk,
Hmm.
and based on what culture you choose, kind of helps. Instead of rolling your stats in this system, they kind of just give you a table to choose from.
Yeah.
You can roll on the table to kind of make it a little bit random if you want,
Hmm.
but it kind of sets the thing because again, the system's really trying to reflect how those cultures were in Middle Earth during the time that they are recommending you play in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So elves are going to be naturally keen-eyed. That's
Hmm.
that's just how it works.
Mhm.
Men are going to have this interesting desire to be very much swayed by the shadow to go
Mhm.
evil or good.
Interesting, yeah.
So your hero culture really kind of defines a lot of aspects
Yeah, it sets the
that
stage
they
for
can do.
everything.
Mm-hmm.
I love
Yep.
that. Yeah, and that's a fun way instead of, like, being like, "Oh, choose your race." Like, it almost, like, it puts a little bit more weight in that decision because it's like you are deciding where you are coming from and all of that. That's really cool.
Yeah, and in a way, it simplifies his character creation.
Mhm.
Like compared to trying to help somebody make a D&D character versus trying to help somebody play the One Ring character,
Mhm.
the One Ring does a much better job, especially introducing people to the system. It's a lot more streamlined. It's a lot more bare bones.
Mhm.
Like, hey, let's make a character so that we can get to the story.
Yeah.
Type thing.
Yeah, we all
So
wanna play, like, we're not spending, like, 2 hours trying to figure out how to make characters. And now I
yeah,
I I am curious, how was your, obviously people can go and watch or not watch, but listen to your guys' character creation. But as a little bit, I guess, of, a sneak peek, how did you find, as a group, going through the character creation of One Ring? Was it fast? Did you enjoy it? Were there any parts where it's like, "Eh?"
I honestly found the character creation to be super simple.
Mhm.
Like you literally just choose your culture, pick your target numbers, pick your proficiencies, and then you're pretty much set.
Yeah, love that. I
Like there's
mean
a couple other little nuances, but it's super simple.
Mhm. And it sounds like it's not a, class game. Like, there's no classes?
No, you
nope.
don't magically gain power as you kill goblins.
Probably the closest thing to classes in the system is outside of the hero culture. The second probably biggest option you have is choosing what kind of calling you have. You
Mm,
can
okay.
be a scholar, you can be a warden,
Mhm,
um, you can be a leader, a captain, where you
mhm.
have those instincts. But as far as mechanically going, callings kind of more act as backgrounds if you're going to compare it to like
Yeah.
D&D. They kind of they kind of act as a subclass, but mechanically they act more as a background where it's pretty straightforward. There's a couple little extra things to throw onto your heroic culture,
Mhm,
and you kind of move on from there. And then, of course, you still have an option where you have a certain number of points, if you will, that you can start putting wherever. It's be like,
mhm.
oh, I want an extra d6 on this skill. I want an extra
Yeah.
d6 on this skill. So there is a component where it's purposely the player themselves doing what they want on their character once they have that foundational culture and calling
Yeah,
established.
decide kinda what they wanna specialize in and, like, what they wanna
Hmm.
be good at, things like that. No, I like that a lot, and, I've, like, come more and more I've liked, systems that don't have classes, but also there's, like, sometimes a fun thing with it too, because like, Dragonbane, another Free League game, um, instead of like having traditional classes, they have like profession type things where it's like, oh, you can be a scholar or hunter and things like that. And like, yeah, it kind of gives you something like abilities. It doesn't like do too much outside of that. Is that kind of similar to how those callings are? Do they give you any, I guess, how you were mentioning how the ancestry stuff would give you, keen eyes if you're an elf, stuff like that. Do those callings also give you something where it's like you gain a bonus where it's like, oh, let's say you're a scholar, you get this, like, knowledge and you're able to recite things.
Yeah. So we'll kind of I'm gonna go off of Brandon's character that he had. He had a dwarf kind of bard type
Mhm.
thing. So he was a dwarf of Durin's folk,
Mhm.
and the calling that I believe you had chosen, Brandon, was messenger. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Ooh, fun.
So messenger, yeah. So messenger is kind of that. It's almost like it's a calling where it's also a profession where you're delivering news.
Mhm.
You're delivering important messages.
Yeah.
Literal a literal messenger.
Yeah.
But it allows you to travel, allows you to be kind of cultured in a unique way. It
Mhm.
allows you to have been like, oh, I've dealt with people over here before.
Mhm.
Because outside of the big kingdoms of Middle Earth, it's pretty much the wild with little pockets of civilization kind of
Yeah.
sprinkled throughout. So, in order to go from one pocket, you got to cross over into the wild, deal with
Mhm.
whatever comes up during that point to get to the next pocket where you're trying to deliver the message to.
Yeah, that's
So,
cool.
so
I
in this
love it.
case, Messenger, what the callings do for the most part is that they allow certain skills to be favored. So every time you make that
Mm,
skill because of your calling, you always roll with advantage on that feat die. So for
nice.
Messenger, the favorite skills are courtesy, song, and travel.
Yeah, like, I mean, it makes sense why you would choose that for kind of a bard type character. I love it. What are some of the examples of some of the other skills? Because it seems like this is more heavily like it's a skill system, it seems like, versus like specifically rolling with stats, like it is about the skills.
Yeah, so Brandon mentioned earlier that there were three main stats that you have that everything
Mhm.
else is based off of, and those three stats are strength, heart, and wits.
Love it.
And underneath each one, there are six skills associated with each one.
Mhm.
Outside of weapons, weapons have their own little thing, but we can get to that later. Um, so a lot of the skills associated with the messenger. So one is travel, and travel is under heart.
Mhm.
Song, interestingly, song is listed underneath strength. So a couple of them, I'm not entirely sure,
Yeah, I
but
mean, I guess that's
they,
your own like your strength is song? Yeah?
yeah,
Music?
it could be that.
Well, the way
So
they word it is strength is like your force of being. It's not just physical strength, but
Oh.
just how imposing and impressive you are as a person, like how you put yourself out there.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
so in D&D, performance is labeled underneath charisma. If performance was a skill in the
Mhm.
One Ring, which probably would be closest to song, it's listed underneath strength because you're creating a presence. You're drawing
Yeah,
attention
that's
to
what I was
yourself.
thinking.
Yeah.
Presence. That's actually good even like that would be a good skill, like presence
Yep.
itself. No, I love that.
Yep. Exactly. There's some really interesting ones. There's lore.
Mhm.
There's riddle. Riddle is a skill,
Ooh. Yeah.
and it's not literally just riddles. It's being proficient in that kind of mindset and in that mind
Mhm.
skill of being
Yeah.
able to solve riddles. So when you're faced with an obstacle that requires some wits for you, riddle might not be a bad skill to try to roll, because in this
Mhm.
system, as long as you can justify why you're using the skill, then the lore master more often than not is going to allow it. So
Yeah.
it's a system that heavily encourages you, like, use your strengths.
Yeah. Come up with creative reasons why you can do this,
Yeah,
and
unlike
even put it to your advantage too. Like, yeah, how can I use riddle to overcome the situation maybe where you're trying to talk with someone? I don't know.
Mhm,
Like you can try and go outside of the norms with that.
mhm, exactly. But yeah, there's lots of different skills, lots of options to be able to choose
Mhm.
from, and that's really fun to do.
Yeah, love it. And so, you did mention a bit of I mean, I think so this is again going to come from me really loving this Land of Eam game where there's actually a lot of rules around travel and stuff like that. And I know like, Lord of the Rings, they go on this whole journey and all of that. Like a big part of the story is that journey. Does One Ring also have like kind of rules and stuff set up for traveling in the game?
Yeah, so there's three adventuring phases in the One
Hmm.
Ring. Um, there is a travel phase
Hmm.
where you kind of roll. Often enough, you're required to make a travel check,
Hmm.
and during that time, you can be waylaid by something minor. So it's not necessarily a combat scenario, but something happens while on the road, because the joke is there are no safe roads in Middle Earth. They're all dangerous all the
Yeah.
time, and it's kind of true.
Hmm.
Um, and so in the travel phase, you would make travel checks and so forth to see how, not only to see if you get some interesting encounters. Some of them are good, some of them are bad.
Yeah.
You also roll to see how fatigued you get,
Yeah.
and that fatigue could then affect your load capacity.
Hmm.
And if your load capacity is affected, then you potentially become wearied, which
Hmm.
then spawns, ill favored circumstances
Yeah.
for your
Bad things.
player character.
Bad
Yeah,
things start to
it
happen.
it definitely kind of ricochets off into other aspects.
Yeah, I
So
love that.
unlike D&D where you can just get a bag of holding, this system's like, no, those don't exist at all. Nothing even remotely like that. It's either your person or your pony. Which
Yeah.
one is it?
You have to carry your shit like a normal person. No, I
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I love that though, because again, like part of it is that journey. Those are elements that matter. And so like making sure like, yeah, you can only carry so much. And that's what I do like about some of these more grittier games where they're like, yeah, no, you do have to track your actual inventory. You do
Mhm.
have to keep an eye on that because these are things that are going to matter later in the game and may mess you up while you're traveling. Um, Though I very quickly want to ask about, so like when you're going on the roads and stuff, like yes, there's always a chance that something bad can happen. They're all dangerous, things like that. Does One Ring have like random encounter tables or things like that to kind of help with those ideas while you're, at least for a GM?
Yeah, no, they do have tables in this book that you can
Hmm.
roll from because I'm a big fan of random tables.
Yeah.
I just bought I don't know if you know the Game Master's
Oh yeah,
Astounding book of
yeah.
it's one of my favorite purchases ever. I love that book so much. I've already been using it.
You would
Brandon can
love
attest to
Land of
it.
Eam so much because that book, like, they have literally a whole PDF that is filled with random encounters.
Mhm.
Like it is so amazing, which is again why I was asking about, because it's like again there are similarities between the games, and so I am curious if they're even location specific too. Like if you are traveling through see, this is where my lack of Lord of the Rings knowledge comes in.
Yeah, it depends. There is a map provided in the book.
Mhm,
Um, it kind of has like it's a map almost for the travel phase in a way,
mhm.
in which it's just kind of a hexagonal pattern
Yeah.
over this portion of Middle Earth, and the portion of Middle Earth that the core rule book and the system heavily focus on is a place called Eriador. And
Mhm,
Eriador, that's probably the most common places you'll hear of is the Shire, the
mhm,
town of Bree,
mhm.
and like Rivendell. Like those are three big places that people
Yeah.
know of from the movies, and those all are in that region of Middle Earth called Eriador. And it'll show places like, oh, here's some civilized land in green,
Mhm.
here's some wild land,
Yeah.
and here's some dark land. Like
Yeah.
it
Gives
gets
you a
even
good
more
mix.
sketchy.
And I love how that, and I love too how that just feels like it can make the traveling not so boring too. Like it can make things exciting when you are going through these different lands. There's actual places on the map that you can like travel through and that can have something there versus sometimes in D&D games, or at least D&D's not meant for travel. Like there's no like really good travel rules or anything. And so sometimes it can be like if you focus on travel, it can feel like why are we doing this when like there's nothing there to kind of support it to make it fun. So I love that they did that with One Ring.
Yeah. No. So yeah, and it gives you tables for like how in depth the encounter is.
Mhm.
It ranges from a joyful sight to terrible misfortune.
I love
Um,
it.
so and everything kind of in between. I
Mhm.
mean, it definitely still encourages the lore master to be creative
Yeah,
and
for sure.
to, even though the world may be kind of established, that doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of things for the lore master to come up with
Mhm.
while running the game.
Absolutely.
So it does that. And as you said, there's definitely rules. There's a whole section on the journey phase or the
Mhm.
travel phase. And I mean, one of the first things you do when you go into the travel phase is that it actually assigns journey roles to each member of the party.
Oh.
And if the party's small enough, then people double dip. And if
Mhm.
it's large enough, then some people may not have anything to do.
Mhm.
You know,
Well, what
you
are these
you know,
roles?
yeah. So there's a guide
Mhm.
in charge of all decisions concerning route, rest, and supplies. There's the hunter in charge of finding food in the wild. There's the lookout, and then there's the
Mhm.
scout in charge of setting up camp, opening up new trails.
I do have to
I love
say
that.
that in our playthrough, we all picked the wrong roles because we didn't know what we'd be doing. We're like, oh, this name sounds like it would work, and it's like, oh, do this role. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah, unfortunately, the journey phase in our actual play, because we were only doing a one shot.
Yeah.
Um, it's hard to fit all these phases in, like a 3-4 hour run.
Oh, for
And the
sure.
journey phase was that part that we kind of did the bare bones, kind of just skimmed over the top
Hmm.
during the actual play, so that we can fit everything in. So, but it was kind of interesting because I know initially I think my wife, she was playing a ranger
Hmm.
because she wanted to be female Aragorn, and she
Hmm.
kind of was female Aragorn.
Love it.
And she, it's funny because she had the hunting skill and she didn't choose hunter as her
Oh
as her role.
no.
And I think there was kind of some last minute changes, but I think people either um there were skills associated with it that they weren't super great at,
Hmm.
or they just rolled bad. It
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
Um and so I think if we, after playing it a couple times, we would have this down pretty well pat, and
Hmm.
it would probably be a much smoother and much more enjoyable phase to go through.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I even love you mentioning the fact that you did have a little bit of struggles with it because yeah, that is so easy to do. It's so easy to mess it up, or not even mess it up, but make the mistake. Like,
mhm.
oh wait, I didn't actually like I have like I'm sure everyone has an experience of making a D&D character and putting the stats the wrong way, or picking the wrong subclass for something, or like specializing in the wrong things. Like it's so easy to do that, and that's the same thing for other systems. Doesn't mean it's the end of the world because you can just kind of do your own thing to work around it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we always joke that's the reason why we're called the Nat One Nerds, is because we don't always roll very high. Um, but it is a very interesting phase to go through in the system for sure.
Hmm.
And it can be pretty enjoyable, and it doesn't have to be necessarily very lengthy either. It's
Yeah.
just, hey, here's some mechanics, because really it's one of those phases where if you really wanted to, especially in playing a one shot, you don't have to do
Yeah,
it.
you can
Like,
skip right over it.
yeah, but if you're doing like a long campaign, or just really want to dive in and just really get all
Hmm.
the potential that the system has, then absolutely do the journey phase. it,
Yeah,
it can be just as fun.
I'm curious for your guys, in your guys' opinion, would you want to explore the journey phase further, like more than you did
Oh,
in the one shot?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that's why you gotta play longer games. Like, you gotta be like, all right, guys, we're gonna be playing One Ring so that we can take advantage of this awesome system.
Brandon, you heard her. We're playing Ring again sometime
Yeah.
soon. So,
Yeah.
All right, season 2 of Not One Nerds is going to be all just a One Ring playthrough.
Exactly. Yes. Sometimes decisions have to be made, and sometimes you just have to play one game. No.
so
I love that. I mean, I support that. Like, do it. Like, have a great time.
do a podcast within a podcast that's all about the One Ring.
Exactly. I mean, why not? Well, I'm actually this is
Other
now
shows
makes
get
me
spin-offs, why can't we?
exactly. I mean, I've seen there's quite a few shows that will literally do just mini arcs of certain games where they're like, we want to actually just explore this more thoroughly. So we'll just play for like 20 sessions and then, complete a whole story, but you don't have to commit to anything super long because sometimes people will like, you know, record for one day and that will be 2 episodes. So like you could have something that gets where you get to experience that longer story and not have to have that much of a commitment, which I think would be really cool to see from you guys, especially with how much you love Lord of the Rings. Like that would be really awesome. Uh, I'm supporting bad habits, maybe, but it's fine. Uh, I am curious though if you guys have, on the show so far, you've covered 4 games, correct? In the first
hmm
season, are there any of them that you do have that urge to make into something longer, like play for
I
longer?
I have actually considered exploring more of the One Ring. Like,
Hmm.
I've talked to Brandon because Free League already has expansion books. They
Hmm.
have 2 currently, and they're coming out with a third. Which the third one I'm very excited about because it's all about Moria
Hmm.
and the depths of the mines, and it's
Oh,
such an
that's cool.
iconic location in Middle Earth.
Hmm.
And if you like the dwarves at all or just thought it was cool in the movies, like, oh my gosh, like there's a whole expansion now for it. So depending on how Christmas comes around or whatnot, or whether I just have a super weak moment on Amazon or whatever, I probably will end up eventually purchasing that.
Hmm.
And I've looked at Brandon and I was like, I would love to revisit the One Ring with one of these expansions and maybe
Hmm.
do episodes based off like, hey, here's a bonus episode because Parker really likes Lord of the Rings, and let's talk about the expansion from Free League Publishing, all about Moria, or
Yeah.
all about the Lone Lands, which is this
Mhm.
very desolate region that there's not a whole lot of lore from Tolkien about, and
Yeah.
it's an expansion that I'm sure Free League had a little bit more creative license with
Mhm.
to do with. So they have a whole expansion book, and it's even a smaller section of Eriador, and they have a whole expansion for it. So
We love
so
that so much.
or
Yeah.
even doing like another kind of 1-2 shot actual play episode again of the
Mhm.
One Ring with those expansions, like, hey, here's a discussion episode about it, and then, hey, let's actually utilize this expansion book in that can inspire another adventure in Eriador with this group. So
Yeah, I love it. And actually, Brandon, because you need to bounce off, thank you for coming on and
Sorry,
doing
my
this.
wife just texted me saying she's really hungry
Oh,
and
no,
needs
you
me to
are
make
all
some
good.
food for her. But thanks. Parker can cover it. I trust his knowledge of One Ring and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, he's got it.
I'm more here to rein him in when he starts going a little crazy. So good luck.
All right, I'll take up that job. All right, yeah, but thank you
But
so much for
thank
coming
you
on.
again so much.
Yeah, thank you. All right, have a great night.
Thanks. You too.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so this has been a fantastic chat so far about One Ring, and I mean, this is great that at least Brandon wasn't the lore master, because I do want to start getting a bit into the lore master stuff. Unless, if you think, do you think there's anything else that at least player facing or at least general mechanics? Oh wait, is there other? Sorry, are there other not tiers, but are there other
phases,
phases? Yes, that's what I was. I'm like, hold
yeah,
on, there was supposed to
there
be
there
several.
are. Yeah. So there's a whole section that I haven't been able to personally get into quite
Mhm,
yet. There's a whole fellowship phase.
mhm,
And the fellowship phase, all that really is just a chance for the fellowship to unwind,
mhm.
recuperate from adventures if they've been wounded. Because
Yeah.
if you're wounded in the One Ring, you're actually wounded. You
Mhm.
break that leg, it has to heal naturally. There's no cure wounds to
Uh-huh.
to just fix it, or a long rest, which I don't know why there are even clerics to begin with in D&D, because you can just take a long rest and it just fixes
Exactly.
everything. Um,
Yeah, your leg will be fine. It will heal itself somehow.
mhm. Yeah, and then depending on when you reach certain milestones, it's definitely, I would say that this leveling up system is a milestone system, kind of
Mhm.
like how most D&D campaigns are run
Yeah, for
nowadays,
sure.
where it's a special fellowship phase called like a Yule phase,
Mhm.
where it's like metaphorically speaking, like, hey, we accomplished something really big. Now let's kind of like, oh, you're able to get a couple additional D6s. Where do you want to put them at?
Yeah.
Type thing. Or if you want to take on another virtue, because one aspect of character creation that you can also do is you can embody cultural virtues. And it's a
Mhm.
list of virtues that are associated with the culture that you're a part of.
Yeah.
With the hobbits, they have their list of virtues that you can pick from, and you can do it in any order or not do ones. It
Mhm.
depends on what you want to do. For
It's up to
instance, if
you.
you're a yeah, so in instance, if you're a hobbit, I should backtrack. You do start with one basic virtue, and
Okay.
there's just kind of a general list that
Mhm.
you can pick from. It's kind of a smaller list, but people can pick from that list and be like, and some
Mhm.
of them are pretty straightforward, simple. Some of them are a little bit more complex.
Mhm. Do you
Some
have
of them
any
are more social.
examples?
Yeah, so let's look at some examples here, because I love flipping through this book, because
Yeah.
this book
Uh, Free
makes my
League
soul happy.
Free League books are so fun to flip through. I only have the only like actual like big Free League book that I have is Vaesen, and I love going through that so much. It just feels like a tome. Like, yes, like look at all the cool monsters.
Well, I love the artwork too.
Oh my
Even just a
god, it's
little
killer.
side or like the
Yeah.
borders, like it's just so cool looking. Like I feel like I'm looking through a tome that is kind of Middle Earthish.
Mhm.
It's really cool.
Oh, I love it.
So for virtues, I'll go over the basic virtues real
Mhm.
quick that you can pick from. One is confidence. Raise your maximum hope rating by 2 points.
Mhm.
Your dour handed, your hardiness, mastery, nimbleness, prowess. So kind of really general
Mhm.
type stuff. I just also realized I listed off words that you're like, what does that mean in this
Yeah.
system? I have no idea.
Nimbleness,
Um,
yeah. I mean, like I believe
so
it means something.
yeah, so like for instance, like mastery is a pretty straightforward one. Choose two skills and make them favored.
Mhm.
You just get
Okay, yeah, yeah.
favored rolls on them every single
Like
time.
kind of
So
a
like this,
bard type
yeah,
thing in
yeah,
D&D. Yep.
almost type thing, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. One is prowess. Lower one of your attribute target numbers by one.
Oh, yeah.
So the threshold to succeed just got
Mhm.
lower for you,
Love
which
that.
is kind of almost like you go one up in armor class. It doesn't seem like a
Mhm.
lot, but oh my gosh, it can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
I always pick defense, by the way, when I play a paladin and choose a fighting style. I always pick defense
Yeah, you always
because
I
that
mean,
armor class.
I've tortured a DM with just going full defense on a paladin before. Like, you will not hit me. Like, you can't even try.
If you really want to do a broken thing, Brandon actually played a character for a few sessions when we were first playing D&D together. He did a Warforged
Oh,
armorer
yeah. Yeah.
artificer with a shield. At level 1, his armor class was already 20.
Oh my god.
So,
There's some broken builds that you can do.
yeah. But we probably should get back on topic here. Cuz um so yeah, those are some of the basic
Mhm.
ones. To give just one example real quick, if that's okay,
Yeah.
from like the more like cultural
Yeah,
virtues that you could pick
absolutely.
from. So one of them, so like virtues of the hobbits. One of the things hobbits are known for is that they're kind of small and nimble, and they can
Mhm.
kind of just disappear. They don't
Yeah.
generally like they don't like the big folk, so
Mhm.
they just like, oh, just. And it's interesting because hobbits don't have any magic about them, but this
Mhm.
ability is just so uncanny to anybody outside of the race of hobbits or the
Yeah.
culture of hobbits that they still view it as supernatural.
Oh, that's
And so in
cool.
this and so in the system, you have this ability to do art of disappearing. If
Mhm.
a location or a situation offers even the smallest opportunity to hide or sneak stealth silently away, you can make a stealth check.
Oh.
If you get one of those success icons from your D6,
Mhm.
you can spend one to just simply disappear.
Oh, that's actually cool that you can, like, spend it too.
Hmm.
Oh, man, I love that, and I'm assuming that as well is just a strictly, like, Hobbit thing, like, you can't get that as any other.
No, you can, because that's
Mhm.
that's very much in line with, again, with the legendarium that Tolkien had
Mhm.
created.
Yeah, and I
So,
think that's great though, because then that does mean there's some diversity between like the people in your party, especially if you're like, hey, one person's a hobbit, one person's a dwarf. They can't pick the same thing and have basically the same ability.
which I think encourages a lot of a collaboration at the table, both mechanically and storytelling
Oh yeah,
wise,
for sure.
which then builds a better unified table, which then helps your friendship and
Hmm.
overall. So yeah, I kind of like that. So in some ways, it might be kind of limiting a little bit, but
Hmm.
I think the benefits outweigh the disadvantages to that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, it makes everyone feel a little bit more special too, because then again, they have those abilities that only they can do. And you don't have that situation where, hey, you have a whole party in D&D and everyone can heal, and the one person who plays the cleric is like, "Oh, well then like my one main thing, being able to heal, is kind of like it's not special anymore." So I like that
Mhm.
approach with like limiting it a little bit, because I don't think limits is bad in the game. Limits can open up more creativity of like what you can do. Just
Mhm.
because it limits one thing doesn't mean it limits everything.
Yeah, exactly. It really depends on your point of view. You
Mhm.
can view it as super limiting, or you can view it as not.
Yeah.
And what I like about the system is that though the target numbers are really high, or they at least they can be really
Mhm.
high, there's still plenty of opportunities. Like the fact that you only have the chance to get a nat 20 rather than also getting a nat 1
Yeah.
in most situations, that's that's kind of cool right there. So
Yeah.
you can succeed there. If you have extra additional dice, there's those like mini nat, the mini nat 20s, quote
Mhm.
unquote, that you can use to, and you can cash them in. So the more you roll, and it's kind of surprising how often sixes came up.
Mhm.
I know, like during our combat scenarios during the actual play, people were rolling sixes on their additional dice with their
Mhm.
favored, with their proficient weapon that they were using, and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna cash that in to do a hard blow, which is going
Yeah.
to double the damage, like
I
just right
love
off the
that.
bat.
Mhm.
And they didn't even roll like the nat 20 on the feat die, but they beat the target number and they got that success. And they're like,
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, like he didn't give it a turn, but he's dead already, so like it's
So it
fine.
it sounds like combat's pretty quick, or at least can be.
Yeah, it can be because the character creation is so streamlined. I feel
Hmm.
like naturally the combat gets a little bit more streamlined a
Yeah,
little
for sure.
bit. It definitely, depending on the combat scenario, it can feel a little bit like, oh, your turn to hit, your turn to hit,
Hmm.
your turn to hit. It can potentially feel that way, but if you do it right, and because again, this, unlike D&D, this isn't combat centered system.
Yeah.
It's a storytell. It's focused on narrative. It's a narrative
Hmm.
based system.
Hmm.
So in combat, you essentially you can do more than just hit things too.
Hmm.
What's kind of interesting with combat is that one of the first things you choose every single round is what kind of stance you take. If you take
Mm-hmm.
the forward stance, you can roll your attacks favored, but then if an enemy comes after you, they can do it favored as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Um,
no, I've heard a few games that do similar things like that, where they have these, like,
mhm,
like, you have to choose how you approach this combat. I love it. Okay, sorry,
mhm.
continue. This is great.
No, absolutely. And what's nice is that if it doesn't work out that round, you can just change it next round.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a defensive stance where
Mhm.
you kind of, you're at a kind of a disadvantage of some sorts, but so is the enemy toward you. So if you're kind
Yeah.
of running low, I'm just gonna hope for the best, but at least I'll be
Defend.
a little safer, like, yeah, which makes sense. You're trying to defend yourself
Yeah.
and whatnot. So it's really interesting. And then there's also options where if you don't want to like physically attack somebody,
Mhm.
you can still choose the stances come with ability. So if you do like
Mhm.
a forward stance, um, let's see if I can find that list here real quick because they
All
are
good.
kind of cool.
Mhm.
If you do the forward stance, you can do like an intimidation essentially
Uh-huh.
because you're so aggressive. Like that's intimidating. So you can kind of use your action to do that.
Oh, I love
And
that.
what
Yeah.
these tests can do, I should say, is that whether forward, open, defensive, rearward, they each have this special ability that you can substitute your physical attack for
Mhm.
that usually acts as a boost to your fellowship.
Yeah.
So if you intimidate the foe, so like your opponents can be made weary,
Mhm.
and that's something you don't want.
Mhm.
There was one that was kind of really cool that I really liked. Oh, so in open, so if you choose the open stance and do that combat task associated with it instead of the
Mhm.
physical attack, any members of the company fighting in forward stance gain an additional 1d6 on their attack.
Ooh, yeah, that's good.
Now, each time for these tasks to work, you do have to make a roll.
Mhm.
So, for instance, for that one, it's an hearten roll,
Mhm.
which is under your heart stat.
Mhm.
So, if you can succeed on beating that heart target number with your hearten roll, with however many d6s you may be attached to that skill, depending on how well your character wants to be in that,
Mhm.
you can potentially give everybody an extra d6, or sorry, yeah, an extra d6.
I love that.
So, which
And
can make a difference.
yeah, because it's fun being able to actually, like, support your party. Because I feel like, you know, in D&D, there are D&D is always gonna be the comparing thing, but in D&D, I feel like there aren't too many abilities that do support, like, your friends. Like, sometimes you don't always want to attack, sometimes you do want to try and put others at an advantage, and other than, like, help, like, the help action, which everyone always forgets about, I always forget about it, like, it's so easy to, it's like, um, there aren't too many things other than, like, healing or I guess enhance ability. Like, those are ones that can help your party, but being able to have that stance, succeed on that check, and then actually help your party with whatever they're doing, so cool.
Yeah. And that's what I really like about this system because I feel like in D&D, if you want to be that supporting character, you almost have to commit to that type. So
Mhm.
like if you choose to be a bard. Now, granted, it's a combat system, so everybody can fight, everybody
Yep,
can
yep.
do that. But there are definitely classes where that's absolutely all you do. Your
Yep.
paladins, your barbarians, your
Yep, yep.
fighters. But if you want to be a supporting, it's almost like the wizard. Yeah, he can technically fight, but he's probably not going to
Yeah.
because a 1d4 is going to take him out practically at low levels.
Staying in the back, like, doing
Yeah,
doing
staying
his
in the
thing.
back, like healing word,
Yeah.
or oh, retreat, guys, retreat,
Yeah.
fireball. Oh, he didn't get out of the way fast enough. Sorry.
Yeah.
um you know Anybody can be supporting, anybody can be frontline
Mhm.
in this system. It just
Yeah.
depends on that particular scenario.
And it's
And
almost
the
like
book even
helps with
encourages.
camaraderie too, like being a
Yes,
group.
absolutely. Yeah, because again, it's that narrative focus. So if the more collaboration and camaraderie there are, the better your narrative is going to naturally
Yeah,
be, because you're
absolutely.
making the story together and it's your story.
Love it.
So
So cool.
yeah, yes. So, but yeah, the combat phase is definitely pretty unique versus
Hmm.
D&D. Um, there are, you do kind of have a somewhat bonus action a little bit. It's
Hmm.
a bit more limiting than in D&D, um, and whatnot. So, but yeah, that's, I mean, that's pretty much, for the most part, that's combat. I
Yeah.
will say that the weapons are already determined. It's already
Hmm.
predetermined how much. It's not HP, it's endurance.
Hmm.
Your health is essentially your endurance, which
Hmm.
by the way is also tied to your wariness,
Mm.
or sorry, your load, which can then potentially, if you get
Oh.
to
Oh
it just
yeah.
cascades. Yeah, it
Yeah,
just
I like
continues
that.
to cascade. Yeah, so every decision you make in the system needs to be, there has to be a little bit of thought put into it. You can't just do willy nilly per se. I mean, you can. Don't get me wrong. I mean,
Hmm.
that's, you can absolutely do that, um,
The
but the
theme of
weapons
Freely
are,
games
yeah.
always need to make a decision that's gonna actually like not be dumb.
Yeah. So weapons already have predetermined amount of damage. So if you hit,
Hmm.
you cause this amount of the endurance loss.
Yeah, makes it
Um,
easy. Like write it down. All
yeah,
right. Yeah.
it's just kind of, it's very straightforward. So it kind of helps. So it still allows you to roll dice for
Hmm.
sure, but it also kind of cuts away at a little bit of the extra fat
Yeah.
to combat.
And so I mean, just makes it just that little bit faster. Yeah, it's fun rolling
Hmm.
dice, but just being able to be like, all right, this does 4. And now, like, okay, we get that done. I hit, that does 4, move on to the next person. And you can kind of
Yeah.
keep rolling like that. And I am curious, is there any sort of like, is there something like an initiative or anything like that that is within One
Yeah,
Ring?
it's determined by the stance choice.
Oh, okay. So everyone,
So
even
mhm.
or I guess I wouldn't say monsters necessarily, but enemies also do that as well.
so that is the case for enemies, but the first and foremost rule for combat is that the fellowship goes first.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Now if the enemy is surprise ambushing them type thing, that's a little
Mhm.
bit different. But
Mhm.
in general, when you kind of come head to head, the fellowship members go first.
Mhm.
And whoever does forward stance goes first. Whoever does
Yeah.
open stance goes next, defensive, and then rearward.
I
And
love it.
then whatever the monsters choose, they go in that same kind of order.
Mhm. That's so cool. Yeah, and
Hmm.
I like the fellowship first because again, a lot of this is like, that almost like common man's journey to like this heroic quest and all of that, and like it's almost putting them at a bit of a advantage within the game, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. Like they may have the advantage, but it's not going to be like, oh, rainbows and butterflies.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what kind of counters that, because I know when we, were talking about the One Ring on our podcast, a couple people that had done the actual play with us had commented that the target numbers were like, we felt like they were kind of really high.
Hmm.
And again, you're in a world where Sauron has pretty heavy influence over the
Yeah.
entirety of Middle Earth, whether he has direct control of it or not. He's still
Hmm.
influencing it in negative ways, and so you kind of have to combat that a little bit.
Hmm.
But the system also allows you, as you said, like for combat, you guys are going first like 75% of the time,
Hmm.
like guaranteed almost. Like you're already going first.
Yeah.
And depending on how well you do, I mean, the fact that they kept rolling, I don't know what it was. My wife was a player,
Hmm.
and she rolled sixes so much during combat. So she's doing all this like extra cool stuff and damage, and I'm like, I literally didn't even have a prayer for this guy to even get to his turn. Like we didn't even finish the full round. My wife would just obliterate them, and so the system, like, it may seem kind of hard, and
Hmm.
again, it's meant to be a little hard. It's meant to be a little
Yeah, of
challenging. If it's
course.
too easy, it's not fun.
Yeah.
Um, but the system does unique ways to kind of help balance it out.
Hmm.
So it's like that might seem hard, but when you start playing it, you start to slowly realize that maybe it's not as hard as I thought it would be.
Exactly.
Hard, but not that hard. And so it's kind of nice.
Yeah, there's a bright side.
Hmm.
I mean, there's the hope a little bit, there is
Yeah.
that hope. And I do want to touch on very quick. You were mentioning like even before that, you can like spend those sixes on things, and specifically in combat, like being able to spend it on like a hard blow where you're able to do extra damage. Are there other, I guess, like kind of maneuvers like that you can spend those sixes on either in the combat or in any of the other phases?
Yeah, absolutely. So, since we were talking about combat,
Hmm.
so if you beat number one, if you beat your target number and you get a six on one of your additional dice, you can do kind of some special damage.
Hmm.
So, for instance, probably a very popular one for a lot of people I know was very popular with the four of us was the heavy blow option.
Hmm. Yeah, of course.
You spend one success icon to inflict to your adversary an additional loss of endurance equal to your strength rating.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then if you're using a two-handed weapon, you can increase that by an additional one.
Hmm.
So,
Oh, that's so
which by the
nice.
way, HP doesn't go up to 100 and something stupid. Like it's not this constantly whittling, whittling, whittling,
Yeah.
whittling. Like obviously it's a TTRPG. They're kind of for a lot of system there kind of has to be a certain amount or else it'll
Hmm.
be over too fast. But when you kill something in the
Yeah.
system.
And it scales
So,
too. So even if it's not super high numbers, you're not going to be, you know, everyone doesn't have like hundreds of health, but they're
mm,
not doing like 50 damage. Like that's not
no,
possible because it scales itself down, and it almost makes some of the math a lot easier too.
yeah, no, absolutely. Another option is you can do a shield thrust. You can, if
Hmm.
your strength is greater than the target's attribute level, spend one success icon to push back your target.
Yeah.
Um, the adversary is inflicted a penalty, losing 1d for the length of the round. So essentially, you can use shield thrust, and they lose a d6.
Hmm.
Should they end up hitting, they lost a d6, or they
Yeah.
lost a d6 to even try to hit you to beat
Hmm.
their target number that they have to beat.
Oh, that's
So
fun.
there are definitely different options, and
Hmm.
obviously in a lot of combat scenarios, heavy blow is kind of a popular one, as I said, but
Yeah.
there are a couple other options as well.
Yeah.
The other thing too that you can do is that if you roll a 10 or that 12 on the feat die to
Hmm.
attack, you can do what's called a piercing blow.
Ooh.
And a piercing blow, you have to beat their protection value. So instead
Hmm.
of just a straight up AC number, there's a couple little more mechanic to it. There's a
Hmm.
parry rating, there's a protection and whatnot. But if you can beat those and get through, then they have a piercing blow and they are now officially wounded. And for most enemies, I would say 90% of enemies in the system, if they're wounded, they're dead.
Yeah.
They're
See,
dead. So
that's the thing as well with like some combat in D&D. It can be like, oh man, you're trading blows, you're stabbing people, and it's like, okay, after like two stabs, I feel like you would be dead by now. Like
yeah, how are you not bleeding out right now?
yeah, like what's going on here? Like sure, maybe every round lasts 6 seconds, but still, you just got stabbed in the chest. Like what's happening here?
Yeah,
Or you got exploded by a fireball.
or the rogue did sneak attack damage and it's
Mhm.
just like
Yeah.
like
Like
how
when
are
you
you
have like I love the more narrative approach to systems because it can be like, that moment when the rogue comes up behind the enemy and they get the drop and they hit that attack, and then it's like, okay, I am able to stab them straight through the back. Like that should then
Mhm.
be rewarded with, yeah, that enemy goes down. Like you were able to accomplish all of that. You were able to go up behind them. You were able to successfully hit. You were able to do that damage. Like why not be like, you know what, you actually, yeah, you bring this enemy down because you did all of this just to get this one moment, and like I feel like it should be rewarded.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really great about the system is that combat is definitely very much an option, but because it's
Hmm.
narratively based, the book also encourages you not to immediately go into combat because
Yes.
while the
Uh-huh.
enemy may die from a wound mechanically speaking, your character can still be wounded, and while you wouldn't die automatically, there's a severe consequence to it.
Hmm.
So if you're wounded, you end up essentially rolling to see how severe the wound is. Some of them is like
Oh,
you'll recover in a few hours, and or you can be severely injured, which could be expressed in days that you
yeah.
recover. Um,
I
or you
played
could go into the dying phase.
Yeah, I played
You can start.
Dragonbane, and they have the same thing where it's like those critical wounds and those like injuries that like last for days. I know the one character ended up like breaking ribs, and it was like 5 days of like having banes on like all of the strength based stuff and all of these things, which I think is
Mhm.
so fun to explore in a longer form game too, like where you actually have to play out those days.
Mhm.
I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So, if you don't mind, there's actually one other phase I kind of want to discuss real
Oh
quick
yeah, for sure.
before we move on, because it's probably my favorite phase in this entire system.
Hmm.
It's called the council phase,
Ooh.
and unlike D&D, where you just make a persuasion check,
Hmm.
there's a whole phase dedicated to doing this. Depending now, obviously, if it's like minor role playing, then
Hmm.
just go through it.
Yeah.
But but in Middle Earth, there are lords and ladies that you come across, like
Hmm.
Elrond and Rivendell. You can be talking to the mayor of the Shire.
Hmm.
You can be talking about some noble coming over from Durin's folk, from the
Hmm.
dwarves. Because some of the people, or you could be talking to Gandalf even.
Yeah.
Um,
It's an
and
option.
your Yeah, in your fellowship, you have to present. Essentially, it's almost like they've kind of turned these into like a mechanical debate that you
Hmm.
have to
Oh
do.
yeah.
And so you first the lore master first decides how difficult it is of a
Hmm.
rating from like a 3, 6, and a 9, depending
Hmm.
on the request that the party or the fellowship is wanting to make.
Hmm.
If it's pretty straightforward, maybe a 3. If it's kind of asking a bit, a 6.
Hmm.
If there's not really any benefit to them, then it's gonna be harder. um,
For sure.
which, depending on the rating, then creates a time limit.
Hmm.
And then somebody acting on behalf of the fellowship, they make a roll, and they essentially can pretty much, for the most part, choose any skill they want. Again,
Hmm.
as long as they can narratively
Yeah.
justify it, then okay, absolutely. Now,
As long as it makes sense.
if you're choosing battle for your option, that may not work. But for the most
Unless you're
part,
like unless though you're trying to impress them through a battle, like maybe to show your strength or something like that
oh,
to
you proved
then
me
like
wrong.
get
You just proved me
yeah.
wrong. That's okay. I approve. I am always down for.
Yeah, you can make anything work if you try hard enough.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Now I
So
want to
for
do that,
in
like where you're going through a scenario where you're trying to impress some people, where it's like, all right, I'm gonna show off in this battle. If I win, you have to do this for me. Hell yeah,
let me show you
that would be
my
fun.
martial arts skills here real quick.
Exactly.
Um, so one of the examples they give is you can roll an awe. There's an
Mhm.
awe skill, like you're kind of like song. It's kind of a
Yeah.
um, presence based skill. Um, where to impress strangers to quickly reveal as or sorry, to impress strangers quickly, revealing much about yourself, like just kind of being
Mhm.
upfront and honest.
Yeah.
Some people really appreciate the blunt and honest approach.
Mhm.
Courtesy to ask for support, especially from friends, or you could roll a riddle to extract information without revealing too much
Mm,
about yourself. So that's where that
love
kind of
it.
that riddle comes in.
Yeah.
So whatever skill they choose, they roll to see if they can beat the target number associated with that skill. So if it's
Mhm.
under heart, they beat their heart target number. If it's under
Yep.
wits, they beat their target number there.
Perfect.
Um, so the roll result determines the time limit of the council. That is the total number of attempts that the player heroes are granted as a group to present their case before they are finally dismissed.
Mhm.
Now, whether you succeed or fail in the roll, you can still do the council phase. You can still talk to them, whether you
Mhm.
succeed or fail in the roll. It's
I
just a
like that.
matter of what kind of consequence happens if you truly fail in this council.
Yeah.
Um, so if you for each 6 or each icon you get on the
Mhm.
success dice that are attached to your feat die, if you have them,
Mhm.
um, I will say if you try to roll a skill where you have no additional dice associated with it, chances are, unless you roll a Gandalf, then
I
you're
mean,
probably not going to succeed.
it's always possible. Like it's like
Hmm.
you shouldn't like it's not like you should avoid it at all costs, but it may not be the best.
Yep,
You may not do
exactly.
great, but it's fine.
Yep. So for each icon you get, though, you get an additional attempt
Mhm.
with the council.
Oh, yeah,
If
I
you
like that.
fail, then at minimum you still have that basic that foundational time limit. But
Mhm.
if you do fail, it ends in a disaster.
Mm.
which is partly up to the lore master. So it's like, not only do they just be like, no, this isn't for us, thanks for visiting us, or like,
Mm-hmm.
we really don't want to hear this, just go away type thing. Like, it could end up like, oh, guards, like,
Yeah.
it could end in disaster. So
Yeah, get these people out of here.
in our actual play, we had such fun with the council phase because
Hmm.
they started out in Rivendell and
Hmm.
they were talking to Elrond,
Love it.
because they were going to a ruined elven city
Hmm.
associated with Elrond's heritage and stuff like that. Elrond had been there before because elves live, they're immortal in Middle Earth.
Hmm.
Um, and they each were trying to make an attempt. And one of the unique roles was Brandon's dwarven dad bard, you know,
Uh-huh.
because he chose song.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he decided he had written a poem about his experience in Rivendell as a dwarf, because in Middle Earth, elves and dwarves do not get along at all.
Hmm.
So the hospitality towards him was less than his other compatriots. And he actually expressed that in the poem. And I'm sitting here as a lore master, I'm like, this poem better end really well, man. Like, but he succeeded on his dice roll, and it was funny
Yeah.
because he actually recites the poem. He actually created a poem
Oh,
as the player, and
that's so good.
it was awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
like, just for that, go listen to the actual play
yeah, just
case.
go. Yeah, if you want
Yeah,
to hear
please.
Brandon recite poetry, yeah,
Go over that
improv
one, nerds
poetry.
now.
Yeah, there we go.
No,
There's a
I love
spinoff right
that.
there. Improv poetry.
Yeah, improv poetry. It feels like that should be something. Yeah, improv poetry.
that'd be hilarious.
That would
See,
be
now I'm
so
gonna have to
good.
create like an actual play situation
Yeah.
where poetry is like the skill that you all should use. So,
Yeah,
um,
a bunch of battling bards where it's like, all right, each of you do your like each of you create a poem and read it off for this challenge, and it's like, oh wait, we actually have to create poems. Like that would be so fun.
mhm. So yeah, and so in the council phase, each player then makes their own attempt. So once the
Hmm.
spokesperson has gone, then everybody does. So in this case, we were given three chances because they failed on the initial roll for the
Hmm.
council phase, and there was three players. So
Hmm.
each person essentially had to succeed on their roll. But kind of like in D&D, there is a help action. You
Yeah,
can grant an additional 1d6, like, hey, I'm going to help you by doing this
yeah.
during your portion of the argument. So, like, again, the target numbers are high, but there are options to help get to that number.
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
I will say about target numbers, if you do a one shot with this system, the book, and I didn't see this when I first did this, there is actually a suggested rule where if you're doing a one shot or a very small campaign, the book's like subtract from 18 instead of 20
Oh, to
to
make it just
lower
a
the
little bit
threshold,
easier.
because you're probably not gonna really do a true level up. You're gonna
Hmm.
pretty much, the skills you have are what they are.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, sorry guys.
It's fine, right? I mean, everyone
Yeah.
was succeeding on things anyway. It's okay.
Oh, yeah. Especially at the end, like I
Hmm.
couldn't get any hits on them hardly. Anyway, so and then the book obviously has some suggestions and stuff like that. And so at the end of the council phase, if they succeed, they're able to pretty much, for the most part, get what they requested.
Yeah.
Um, if they fail, let's see, if they fail, the opposite. But if it's a disaster, the book essentially says if it ends in disaster, so if they fail that initial roll and then fail the council phase on top of it, the
Hmm.
company is now seen as a threat by the folk encountered.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
they
mean,
may end up being
that definitely sounds
imprisoned,
like a
they may be
disaster.
attacked, or they may just be heavily harassed,
Yeah, absolutely.
while around that area. So even if they're really ticked, they may not necessarily do anything directly, but they can
Hmm.
still cause great misfortune to the fellowship or to the company.
Yeah. I'm actually really curious. Did you run into any situations where anyone failed like really badly within your actual play?
I'm trying to think if anybody truly failed, because everybody essentially ended up succeeding
Hmm.
during the council phase because they were pulling in their resources,
Hmm.
which in this system, you want to be careful how you use your resources,
Hmm.
but you want to use your resources at
Oh,
the
I
exact
mean,
same time.
they're there for a reason. You want to use
Yeah.
them.
Oh yeah. Um, I'm trying to think if anybody drastically failed. I know there was one player that rolled some Eye of Saurons, but she wasn't she wasn't miserable, which is the condition you need in order to become a nat 1
Mhm.
essentially. So she failed, but not spectacularly. I'm trying to think if there was an instance
They were
where they
just that
did that.
cool. Like
I think, well, no, there was one. I think there was a scenario where, as a lore master, I determined that somebody, um, I think, I think somebody like dropped their weapon or something.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody truly failed. Kind of
Mhm.
not to the disaster level that
Yeah, of
like we
course.
just read about. Everybody ended up doing. People were doing better than they think they were, essentially. So, which is good. It means they were
Yeah.
having fun, but
Yeah.
they still failed, and that's also okay too.
Yeah, absolutely. Failing
Failure is
is
okay.
okay.
It's an option. Failure is an option.
Exactly.
Um, so, but yeah, so those are just kind of some of the phases.
Yeah, I like those a lot. And I like
Yeah, the
breaking even the
council.
game down into phases. Like it almost makes it more
Mhm.
manageable. Like, okay, we're going through the journey right now. We're going through combat. We're going through oh god, what was the level up one? It's the Yule?
The fellowship
Fellowship.
phase.
Yep. And then okay, yeah. The fellowship
Mhm.
phase, and then you have the council phase, and it's just like, okay, yeah, these are each parts within that like kind of story, and they break it down for you.
Yeah, and it allows everybody to try something new.
Mhm.
So if you're playing a very introverted character in D&D or even in Pathfinder or whatever, you're not going to be doing a whole lot of talking. Your charisma
Mhm.
stats are not going to be very high at all. But in this system, it's like, well, if you're going to present this argument to a council of people, like to a lord or lady,
Mhm.
you got to talk.
Mhm.
So how are you doing that? I think one player, she did lore.
Mhm.
She talked about how, because the essentially what they were debating was is if the party as a whole could go do this task that Elrond wanted, because
Mhm.
he was just going to send other people,
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
because he didn't want to use this party, especially with there being a dwarf in there.
Mhm.
And Elrond's a pretty lenient guy, but even he's not completely unfazed by his people's bias
Mhm.
to or their lack of respect toward dwarves. Because if you look in the movie, when Elrond's wishing the Fellowship goodbye, he says, "May the blessings of elves, men," and then it shows Gimli the dwarf, and then he says, "Free folk." Like he can't even say
Oh.
dwarf. So it's just like I'm just gonna lump the rest of the people with
Mhm.
with
Aw.
you. So like he has more respect for men than he does for dwarves.
Mhm.
It's um so they're trying to convince, and so one player did lore to try to convince him, like, hey, you've had good relationships with the dwarves in the past,
Yeah.
and like we've done things together as a free peoples,
Mhm.
overall, and there's old alliances and stuff like that, and
Mhm.
she succeeded on that role and whatnot. So it was very cool. It's very cool how creative they got.
Yeah.
And again, as long as it's narratively justified, the system encourages you to build on those strengths. So
Yeah, I
yeah, you
love
may
that
not
so
have a
much.
ton of skills where you have a ton of extra d6s to use,
Mhm.
but you can use the ones with d6s attached to
Yeah.
them.
And that's almost like kind of the charm of like, you're deciding like, hey, I want to play someone who's really good at lore, who's really knowledgeable about these things. So it's almost like that's the natural thing. They're going to try and solve situations using this thing that is their specialty. So I think it even makes a lot of sense. Like sometimes I think people can be like it feels like power gaming, but like it's not really when that's what that character is good at. That's what they specialize in. That they're good at it for a reason. It's not just because it's like, oh, I want to make sure I roll good on everything, but I want to be a knowledgeable character. I want to be
Yeah.
able to approach a situation, say, hey, in the past, you guys had a decent relationship and, we've done a lot together and all of that. I love it so much. And so I'm curious for you, especially as a huge Tolkien fan, how did you find running One Ring? Like, what was your experience as a lore master?
For my first time ever, my first and so far only time lore mastering the system, um, I think the biggest challenge for me was that I almost knew too much,
Hmm.
and I was so scared to inwardly break canon
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I have such huge respect for Tolkien. I mean, in reality, it's just in my kitchen with like three other people. Like nobody really cares, but I do.
Yeah.
Um, and so I had to be like, okay, what can we do? What kind of adventures can we have that isn't going to influence events on too big of a scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because obviously, if it's too big of a scale, like, oh, let's go march to Mordor and just go like try to fight Sauron himself. Like, number
Of
one, you're all
course.
gonna die.
Yeah, first session, let's go.
Yeah, number one, you probably wouldn't even make it into Mordor before you died. Even if you do, you definitely will die. Uh, and Frodo kills Sauron via destroying the One Ring, so
Mhm.
can't have that happening. So I mean, luckily the system again it focuses on a certain region of
Mhm.
Middle Earth, so I mean people aren't going to do that. Hopefully, TTRPG player is going to do what TTRP player is going to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe they'll have their own offshoot version of that
yeah,
story and, what they wanna do there.
maybe yeah. So I think for me it was almost like I thought it would be very helpful, but then I saw ways that it was at a disadvantage. So that's
Yeah.
why I say that you don't have to be a Tolkien buff to
Mhm.
play this game, and you don't need to be a Tolkien buff to run the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
As long as you're as long as you read the core rule book and you just are there to have fun and just to see the positives and to really build on those, like it's just as fun of a system as any
Yeah.
other system.
And yeah, tell a
So
story.
and, there's almost an advantage to not knowing too much. Like somebody that's only seen the movies, good introduction, they get a
Mhm.
general idea,
Yep.
but then they like feel like they have more freedom to do these different things.
Mhm.
So
I love that
um,
actually. Mhm.
after the actual play, I did think of a couple more adventure ideas. So
Mhm.
the adventure idea that we had was I don't think it'll give too much away, um, but they were going after a rumored uh, Palantir, which is a
Mhm.
seeing stone.
Mm.
And in lore, there's only 7 of them, and pretty much all of them are lost or destroyed or whatever, except
Mhm.
for 3, and one of them Sauron has,
Mhm.
which is how Saruman communicates with them because they both
Mhm.
have seeing stones. And so that's very much established in lore. There are only 7 of these,
Mhm.
and so in my lore is that elven smiths from the previous age of the world had attempted to see if they could somewhat minorly vaguely replicate
Yeah.
one. And so it was a very minor one. It was a very small one.
Mhm.
It wasn't going to be able to do a whole lot. But
Mhm.
Elrond, if there was rumors, and that there was also rumors that the enemy was going around that area potentially looking for it, and Elrond
Mhm.
did not want them getting any more advantage than they already had,
Mhm.
because Elrond, being the wise man he knew, he would have known by this point that Sauron had or most likely had one of these stones, which
Yeah.
now made them dangerous. So he's
Mhm.
like, I don't need any more. So he says, if you either confirm that there isn't one, or if you do, destroy it slash bring it back.
Yeah.
So
Love it.
and so that was the adventure. It's kind of breaking lore a little bit, but it was to a point where it's kind of like what Free League was doing with this system. It was
Yeah.
enough creative license to get creative, but not enough to like truly break lore and still be
Mhm.
able to respect it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's when it comes to people playing the game, it's probably going to be people trying to follow the lore and the stories a bit more thoroughly, especially if they're fans of, the movies and the Tolkien stuff. And there might be people that are like, the world's cool and I just want to play with that instead of like actually worrying too much about, I need to make sure this line of events happen or I need to make sure there's only so many of whatever. And that's why I do think your comment of like people who don't know anything obviously can still run the game and they're almost at it's not even an advantage, but it's a completely different experience at that point because you don't have all of that meta knowledge there of like, okay, I need to make sure there's only 7 of these stones and all of that. So I think that's really, really cool. And I'm curious if you would say that like almost those quest type stories are like the ones that are really good at being told within One Ring.
I would definitely say so.
Mhm.
The system definitely encourages you to act as a fellowship company
Mhm.
and to stick together and really build on each other's strengths and to
Mhm.
help each other with their weaknesses.
Yeah, I love it.
Because one of the what's a really cool thing about the system is that the mechanics encourage not only the narrative, but there are mechanics built in that also just encourage just straight up role playing.
Mhm.
And one of those um, is that you can get shadow points, which is
Okay.
the influence of the shadow or the enemy or his influence.
Mhm.
Because Sauron may not have dominion over those areas anymore, but his presence from ages past, when he did kind of have a foothold, they still linger.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
in Eriador, there's a place called Angmar,
Mhm.
kind of, and that's where the Witch King gets his name, the Witch King of Angmar, that
Mhm.
main Nazgul character. He ruled that area, and that's where he was able to launch attacks into Eriador and
Mhm.
really break that region down into what it is today. Because
Mhm.
that region essentially fell, but it wasn't taken over.
Okay.
There was reinforcements from Gondor and the elves that
Yeah.
went north, and they were able to drive them away, but the people were shattered, and that's where we get the
Mhm.
Rangers. They're
Yeah.
a remains of a noble kingdom.
Mhm.
So, but now they're rangers that just wander the wilds,
Yeah.
protecting protecting the few pockets of civilization um, that are left where they're not appreciated.
Mhm. I love
In the
that.
movie, when Frodo says, "Who's that man in the corner that's been looking at us?" Oh, he's one of them rangers.
Mhm.
Like he can come in, he can spend his money, he can do whatever he wants, but he's a ranger.
Mhm.
Like it's just this. Um, but there's definitely plenty of storytelling to be had here,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so the system does a good job um, of still highlighting those influences that Sauron once had or his
Mhm.
minions once had sway over. Um, And when you come across certain scenarios, you have to roll a valor or a wisdom roll depending on the kind of shadow.
Mhm.
Is it kind of attacking your mind, or is it kind of going after your heart a little bit
Yeah.
here? And if you fail your resistance roll associated with that attribute, then you gain shadow
Mhm.
points. And if your shadow either meets or beats your current hope status, then you become miserable, and that's
Yeah.
where the potential for a nat one becomes a
Yeah.
reality,
I
mechanically speaking.
I like that a lot, and I like how it's almost like I like how it's a kind of consequence, or not even a consequence, but like an effect that happens that isn't like, oh, you get stabbed or anything, but like it is like almost like mentally wearing you down
Yeah,
and all of that. And that's like
yeah,
kind
and
of the
if you
big
get
thing that you don't want that to happen.
yeah, I know, and if you're influenced by the shadow too much, then you start obtaining negative attributes.
Mhm.
You become for dwarves, they might start becoming really greedy.
Mm. Mhm.
Kind of like if you've seen the Hobbit movies, Thorin kind of had that dragon sickness thing happening. That could
Mhm.
potentially happen to your dwarf character. Um, if you're a ranger, your bitterness towards the civilized pockets just becomes too great. And you're like, I'm tired of protecting people that don't, value me,
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff. So you start developing these negative attributes and whatnot. And unfortunately, we haven't played enough to really see the full scope of those.
Mhm.
But the fact that that's even an option is already very exciting. And
Yeah.
I would love to do a long term, or at least a longer mini campaign or something with length to it with this system.
Like
Um,
anything that's longer than one game, please.
yeah, anything that's
Um
longer than one game. Um, but tied in with the shadow is your hope, and
Mhm.
hope is a resource, is a mechanical resource you have in the system, where if you spend a hope, you get an extra 1d6 to whatever type of roll you're trying to make.
Mhm. I love
Combat,
it.
out of combat, whatever, you can use it. But what's the key is that the rules specifically state if your shadow score meets or beats your current hope level. So if you
Mhm.
spend a lot of hope, then your hope level is really low. So you could have this much shadow and you had this much hope and you're fine, but then you suddenly use one too many,
Uh,
you're getting shadow points,
oof.
and it's not good. And now there are ways to get rid of those shadows,
Mhm.
but it's a good idea to try to just simply avoid that as much as possible. So again,
Absolutely.
it goes back to that: use your resources absolutely, but be smart how you use your
Yeah, be
resources.
very, very,
And
very careful.
there may be scenarios where you may have to just take one for the team, and to
Mhm.
get through the current situation you're in,
Mhm.
like you're in a bad situation, one of your party members might be wounded.
Mhm.
We need to kill off these buggers so that we can get out of here. I'm going to take shadow.
Yeah,
I'm going to spend
absolutely.
hope, because as long as you have hope, even if it's below shadow, you can still technically use it.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
You're
I
just going to be
like
worse
that.
off.
Yeah, I like that trade-off a lot. No, I think this is really, really cool. I mean, again, I like I said before we started to talk here, I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings person. I don't really know like the lore and stuff. I've watched the movies a few times, but it's like never been something that's really stuck. But this sounds really, really fun to play, especially with almost still being able to make those comparisons with like Land of Eam and stuff too, where it's like I can see where like they have a whole thing about dread and all of that, and so like I can get where that's like kind of the shadow instead, and like it's really, really cool, and it makes me excited to try. Like I really do want to try this now, especially as someone who's not. And you saying that it's not important to know the lore makes me feel better about it, because I definitely don't know anything. But I think though that we are probably getting pretty close to the end here. I mean, obviously there's quite a few like GMing type things that we didn't quite cover. I mean, like running enemies, I guess, is something that we could go about, but like I think that's even specific to, you need to like kind of experience it, you need to see like the stats and stuff. Like we could go through it, but I think we're starting to get pretty long here. So I think no, it's all good. No, this has been great. It's been really awesome hearing about the game and hearing about like the lore and stuff, and even your knowledge about it has just been really, really cool. And so I guess we will get to wrapping it up here, unless you think there's anything like super important, like that's like something that's really important to the game that we haven't covered yet. If not, then I think that we can get to wrapping up here.
I think we hit a lot of the highlights of the
Hmm.
system. Obviously, there's a lot more to the system that I have yet to get to,
Hmm.
and that isn't you can't cover every single thing in a single
Oh yeah.
podcast episode.
Oh, for sure.
So,
There's so
but
many
I'm not
things.
going to try, and we didn't try that on ours, and we gave ourselves 5 episodes
Yeah.
to do this, and we still didn't try to do every single little
Hmm.
thing. But I think we've hit a lot of the main highlights of the system and a lot of the core mechanics of
Yeah.
the system. Um,
And a lot of the
as I
beauty of it, it's a great
mhm.
great game.
Yeah, and honestly, the core rulebook does a really good job of explaining things,
Hmm.
which is really impressive because I know it would have come out, I believe, in like Swedish, I believe,
Hmm.
first and foremost, and then it would have been, because I believe it's Fear League's a Swedish company, I
Yeah,
believe.
I believe
So
so. Oh well,
yeah,
not I believe so. I know they are a Swedish company. Whether or not I'm trying to. Do they come out with both Swedish and English translations of every book? I believe that they would. Like that would make sense.
yeah. No, I mean that makes sense. I mean, I'm just glad they did.
Yeah.
So thank you, Free League Publishing, for
Yeah.
publishing in English. We very much appreciate it. We love your stuff.
Yeah, thank you for
Um,
sharing like all your amazing games with the world that doesn't understand Swedish.
yeah, I will say that honestly, a lot of questions are. I feel like this is a core rulebook. This is one of those core rulebooks that obviously I'm a little biased toward Tolkien, so
Hmm.
I'm going to go in with a positive attitude right off the bat.
Hmm.
But it's one of those core TTRPG rulebooks that I just legitly just enjoy just sitting down and reading.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So if anybody's worried about being a little overwhelmed, this is one of those books. It's okay. You can sit down and just read it.
Hmm.
And if need be, you can look at the table of contents and kind of start at a certain section and
Yep.
kind of work however works for you.
Yeah, flip through,
The
jump
book does a
around.
good job of giving a brief history of a lot of the major locations in Eriador.
Hmm.
So lore shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, it's
If you
like
don't know anything, Willow, you could be a great lore master. So,
I could be a lore
um,
master one day. Yes.
yes, just you can just go back and read that chapter and read about the locations
Hmm.
and kind of the brief history of Eriador and
Yeah, just have an
um,
idea of it and
yeah,
go head first into the game. I love it. But yeah, I'd love to wrap up though, because I really want to ask you my favorite question. Especially because it just makes me really happy, and I know how much you love Lord of the Rings and this game, so I just want to know. Um so far in your experience of playing the game and reading it and all of that, do you have like, I guess, a big reason of why you love One Ring? It's a difficult one to answer.
it is, but I think anybody in the TTRPG community that's wanting to try out a new system should seriously consider the One Ring, just
Mhm,
solely because, as mentioned, it is very narrative driven.
mhm,
It's very role play driven system. it has built-in mechanics and lore that will help your table come together better than other systems will,
Mhm.
just right from the get-go.
I love it.
And because it's so heavily invested in Tolkien, this system will also allow you to kind of learn those same lessons you would by reading the Lord of the Rings.
Mhm.
That, it's the small everyday deeds of people that keep evil at bay.
I love it.
Even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
Mhm.
Um, to hold on to hope no matter how bleak the situation may be.
Mhm.
you know and to just be able to find that courage deep within you, just as Bilbo did when he faced Smaug the dragon
Mhm.
alone, somebody who had never even been on an adventure before, and his first one is battling a dragon. It's like a level 1 character going up against a dragon in D&D.
It's like, "Oh, no."
um,
No, I
yeah,
love it.
but it's also to show too that violence isn't the answer, and
Mhm.
it's also not always a solution either. um, but it just allows you to have the full expanse of role playing, and I think this system does a good job of getting the full tabletop experience. And
I love
so,
that.
for multiple reasons, I recommend it, both mechanically speaking, literary Tolkien viewpoint,
Mhm.
and just for role playing reasons. It's just a system that does, out of the four we've explored and out of the ones I've heard about, this system, in my opinion, is the most well rounded.
Mhm. I love that. Absolutely. No, that's great, and I love just hearing people's, like, even just their personal opinions of, like, why they love these games. It
Hmm.
just makes me really, really happy, and that was fantastic. I wrote a few notes of, like, even, like, the "Hold on hope, however bleak," like, that's just, like, really I love
Hmm.
that so much. And I just want
Yeah.
to say thank you so much for coming on and talking about One Ring with me because this was absolutely fantastic. And if anyone listening, you want to know more about One Ring, first off, you can go check out Nat One Nerds and their entire little mini series that they did on One Ring. They go over the character creation, they go over actually running the game, they go over I believe like your advice on how to like GM the game and even like your thoughts of GMing the game, and like they do this whole 5-part series and it gives you a they have a bit more time to actually explore some of these topics versus an episode, and you can hear it get played out. So it's a great way to actually experience the game for yourself without getting it yourself yet. But if you find it to be an awesome game and you find it resonates with you as a person, please consider going over to Free League and getting the game for yourself because it's really, really sounds really cool. And I haven't played it yet, but I have played other Free League games. I've read other Free League games. They're all fantastic, so I can just recommend them just from that. Like I know it's going to be great because it's Free League. Um but yes, please go and do all of that. And I guess I'll do kind of one final thank you, Parker, so much for coming on, and thank you, Brandon, for coming on too. Unfortunately, he had to leave early, but that is okay. And I guess we will. The last thing we'll do here is if you just want to tell everyone again where they can find your show and where they can find you on social medias, do that, and we will end the episode there.
Yeah, so if you want to find Nat One Nerds on social media, we're mostly active on Instagram.
Mhm.
We also have a Facebook, and we also have a Threads. We're kind of still figuring out the thread thing. We'll admit that, because neither of us ever had done Twitter or anything like that
It's
beforehand.
confusing.
So yeah, so it's a different platform, but you can find us on all three of those platforms to get podcast updates.
Mhm.
Um, you know, just some general advice that we come across that we wanted to share real quick.
I love it.
Just some fun memes and stuff like that. Just kind of just simple stuff
Mhm.
to. There's also some D&D advice as well on there, just because it's such a popular system. So we
and
do a little segment.
And that's the thing as well. Like, yeah, even though a lot of us don't want to play D&D, that doesn't mean we also don't have our love for the system and our own advice for the system and stuff
Hmm.
like that. Like, might as like it's still like even though it's not everyone's preferred game, it's still a good game. It's still a game that a
Hmm.
lot of people enjoy. So I love that too.
Yeah, no, we definitely recognize our D&D roots, and we respect it, and we're grateful. We're grateful for Dungeons and Dragons
Yeah.
to getting us, as the gateway drug essentially into this wonderful community. Um, but as far as the actual podcast, you should be able to find it on most podcast platforms, as far as I can tell. Some of the bigger ones you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts,
Mhm.
Google Podcasts. Currently, that's going away soon,
Oh yeah,
unfortunately,
it's so
because
weird.
that's my preferred platform,
Mhm.
honestly, for my podcasts. You can find us on Good Pods,
Mhm.
Amazon Music, and whatnot. But
Yeah, all the
there's
places.
also some that pull, so you can find us on there.
Yeah.
So we appreciate anybody that listens to us. Thanks, Willow, for having us on.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure. And, the Fate Accelerated
Hmm.
episode, I'm like trying to get like my mind's going faster than my mouth can go. The Fate Accelerated episode was fantastic, and this was even great to do as well. So it
Hmm.
is more than my pleasure to have you guys on again. But yeah, I think though that is the end. Thank you so much for coming on, Parker. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening and I guess watching as well, because video, that's fun. And I think that is the end. So thank you so much and goodbye.